The most expensive signature is the one written with someone else's future. Claire Bennett had always believed that even the harshest winter could not freeze the bond between brother and sister. Every sunrise in Silver Hollow began the same way. She gathered fresh herbs beside the narrow creek before the rest of the village awakened, filled woven baskets with wildflowers that grew beneath towering pine trees, and returned home carrying enough medicinal plants to help elderly neighbors through another difficult season. The pack had never treated Omegas as equals, but Claire refused to let bitterness take root inside her heart. She smiled at children who ran through muddy streets, shared warm bread with widows who lived alone, and quietly thanked the moon every evening for another peaceful day. She believed kindness always returned, even if it took years to find its way home. Her older brother, Ethan Bennett, had once believed the same. Since their parents passed away, he had worked tirelessly to protect the small cabin they inherited together. Long hours repairing fences, chopping firewood, and accepting every difficult task the pack offered had left deep lines across his young face long before his 30th birthday. Claire often noticed him staring silently at unpaid bills resting on the kitchen table after supper. Whenever she asked if something was wrong, he always answered with the same reassuring smile. Everything will be all right. She wanted to believe him because she had trusted those words her entire life. On the final evening before the Harvest Moon Festival, Silver Hollow buzzed with quiet excitement. Families decorated wooden porches with lanterns while children laughed beneath strings of glowing lights stretching across the village square. Claire carefully arranged freshly baked bread inside a basket, hoping to deliver it to an elderly neighbor before the celebration began. As she reached for her shawl, she noticed Ethan standing alone beside the fireplace, his eyes fixed upon several folded documents spread across the old oak table. A stranger wearing a charcoal gray traveling cloak sat opposite him, his face hidden beneath a broad hat that concealed every recognizable feature. Their conversation stopped the moment Claire entered the room. Ethan quickly folded the papers before forcing another reassuring smile. "Would you mind giving us a few minutes?" he asked gently. Claire nodded without suspicion. Of course. She quietly stepped outside, believing she had interrupted ordinary business. Through the frosted window, she saw Ethan hesitate while holding a feather quill above the parchment. For one long heartbeat, his hand remained perfectly still. Then he signed his name. The stranger slowly pushed a heavy leather pouch across the table. Even from outside, Claire heard the unmistakable sound of dozens of silver coins settling together. She frowned with mild curiosity. They had never possessed that much money before. Perhaps Ethan had finally found work that would save their struggling home. Hope quietly replaced every question in her mind. She never imagined the ink drying upon that parchment had already changed her future forever. Later that night, Ethan prepared an unusually generous supper. Fresh stew filled the tiny cabin with comforting aromas, while warm cider steamed beside the fire. Claire laughed when he insisted she take the larger serving, teasing him that he was acting as though it were her birthday. Ethan smiled, but sadness lingered quietly behind his eyes. Several times he looked as though he wanted to say something important. Each time he lowered his gaze instead. After supper, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Pack only what you truly need," he said softly. "We are leaving before sunrise." Claire blinked in surprise. "Leaving? Where are we going?" Ethan forced another calm expression. "A neighboring territory has offered honest work. They need healers and gardeners. You deserve a better life than this place has given you." Claire searched his face for answers, but found only exhaustion. She trusted him completely, so she simply nodded. "If we are together, anywhere can become home." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment before quietly turning away. Long after midnight, Claire drifted into restless sleep. She dreamed of standing beneath a brilliant full moon inside an endless forest where silver mist floated between ancient pine trees. Somewhere ahead stood the silhouette of a tall man she could never fully reach. Though his face remained hidden, an unfamiliar warmth surrounded her as his voice carried gently through the moonlight. "I have searched every season for you," he whispered. Before she could answer, the dream dissolved into morning light. Claire awoke to the sound of carriage wheels outside the cabin. Pulling aside the curtain, she expected to see merchants preparing for travel. Instead, she found 4 mounted riders wearing the silver wolf crest of blackthorn, The rival pack every child in Silver Hollow had been taught to fear. Her heartbeat quickened. Ethan opened the front door before she could speak. His smile had disappeared completely. Without meeting her eyes, he quietly lifted her small travel bag and carried it toward the waiting carriage while the stranger from the previous evening unfolded the signed parchment beneath the pale glow of dawn. Claire stood frozen as the stranger's calm voice broke the silence of the early morning. By lawful agreement witnessed under the authority of the Border Trade Council, Claire Bennett is hereby transferred into the protection of Blackthorn Pack. Every word echoed inside her mind without making sense. She looked from the parchment to the silver wolf crest stitched across the riders' cloaks before finally turning toward Ethan. Surely there had been some terrible mistake. Surely her brother would explain everything. Instead, he remained motionless, his eyes fixed upon the damp ground beneath his boots. "Ethan," she whispered, struggling to steady her voice. "What is happening?" He inhaled slowly before answering. "You are going to Blackthorn." Claire stared at him, unable to understand. "Why?" His shoulders tensed beneath the weight of a question he had dreaded for days. "Because they can give you the life I never could." She took one uncertain step toward him. "Then come with me." For the first time since sunrise, he finally looked into her eyes. They were filled with exhaustion, regret, and something that looked dangerously close to shame. "I cannot." Before Claire could ask another question, the leader of the escort stepped forward with respectful composure. Unlike the terrifying soldiers described in Silver Hollow's stories, his voice carried neither cruelty nor arrogance. "Miss Bennett," he said politely, "your belongings have already been secured. We should begin our journey before the mountain roads become crowded." Claire searched every face surrounding her, hoping someone would reveal this strange morning as nothing more than an elaborate misunderstanding. No one did. She slowly climbed into the waiting carriage, her hands trembling as she placed her small satchel beside her. Through the open window, she watched Ethan standing alone outside the weathered cabin that had once felt like the safest place in the world. He never waved goodbye. He simply remained still as the horses began pulling the carriage away from everything she had ever known. Silver Hollow gradually disappeared behind rows of towering pine trees, while the rising sun painted the autumn landscape with soft gold and pale orange light. Claire wiped away the quiet tears gathering in her eyes before anyone could notice them. She had imagined countless ways her future might unfold, but none had ever included leaving home surrounded by strangers wearing the colors of an enemy pack. Hours passed as the carriage followed narrow mountain roads winding through endless forests. To Claire's surprise, none of the escorts treated her as a prisoner. They stopped beside clear streams so the horses could drink, offered her fresh water without being asked, and even waited patiently while she gathered her courage before continuing the journey. Their unexpected courtesy only deepened her confusion. If Blackthorn truly considered Silver Hollow its enemy, why did everyone behave with such quiet respect? By midday, they reached a high overlook where the road curved along the mountainside. Claire gazed across the breathtaking valley below and caught her first distant glimpse of Blackthorn. Massive stone walls surrounded an elegant city nestled between rivers and evergreen forests. Towering watchtowers reflected sunlight above graceful rooftops, while silver banners danced gently in the breeze. It looked nothing like the frightening fortress she had imagined during childhood. The escort captain noticed her expression. "Beautiful, is it not?" Claire answered honestly before thinking. "It is." The captain smiled faintly. "Many travelers say the same." He offered no further explanation. Late that afternoon, far beyond the city gates, another conversation unfolded inside the royal palace overlooking the valley. Alpha King Adrian Blackwood stood alone beside an enormous window stretching from floor to ceiling, watching distant clouds drift across the mountains. His black royal coat moved gently with the cool autumn wind flowing through the open balcony doors. For nearly 10 years, every full moon had brought him the same impossible dream. A young woman with kind blue eyes wandered through endless forests bathed in silver light. No matter how many times he tried to reach her, Dawn always stole her away before he could learn her name. Advisors had dismissed the dreams as imagination. Ancient scholars had called them unfinished prophecy. Adrian had stopped searching for explanations years ago, yet he had never forgotten the face that returned beneath every moonlit sky. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Captain Marcus entered the chamber carrying a sealed letter embossed with the black thorn crest. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "the guest from Silver Hollow has crossed the eastern border. She will arrive before sunset." Adrian accepted the letter without opening it. Instead, he continued watching the distant mountain road disappearing into the forest. Something deep inside him stirred with quiet certainty, impossible to explain yet impossible to ignore. After several silent moments, he finally spoke. "Prepare the eastern guest residence." Captain Marcus blinked in surprise. "The guest residence, Your Majesty?" Adrian nodded once. "She enters this kingdom under my personal protection." The captain lowered his head immediately. "As you command." As he departed, Adrian remained standing beside the window, unaware that the young woman approaching Blackthorn carried the very face that had quietly lived inside every dream he had never been able to forget. The towering gates of Blackthorn opened with quiet dignity as Claire Bennett's carriage rolled into the capital beneath the warm glow of the late afternoon sun. She had expected cold stares, raised weapons, and the unmistakable feeling of being unwelcome. Instead, elegant stone streets stretched before her, lined with towering oak trees whose golden autumn leaves drifted gently across clean walkways. Merchants arranged baskets of fresh fruit beneath colorful awnings. Children chased one another through the town square with carefree laughter, and musicians played soft melodies beside a crystal fountain sparkling beneath the fading sunlight. Nothing about the city resembled the frightening stories she had heard throughout her childhood. The escort captain guided the carriage toward the enormous royal palace rising above the valley like something from an old legend. Its silver towers reflected the evening sky, while countless stained glass windows shimmered with shades of sapphire and gold. Claire quietly pressed one hand against the carriage window, unable to hide her amazement. If this truly was the enemy kingdom, why did it feel so peaceful? When the carriage stopped before the palace steps, several attendants immediately approached. None reached for restraints. None spoke harshly. An elderly woman wearing the formal attire of the royal household stepped forward with a gentle smile and offered a respectful bow. "Welcome to Blackthorn, Miss Bennett," she said warmly. "My name is Eleanor. His Majesty has instructed us to prepare your residence before your arrival." Claire blinked in confusion. "My residence?" Eleanor nodded as though the arrangement were perfectly ordinary. "Please follow me." Claire climbed the wide marble staircase, surrounded by polished stone columns carved with ancient wolves, flowering vines, and crescent moons. Every hallway glowed beneath elegant chandeliers while colorful sunlight poured through stained glass windows, painting shifting patterns across the floor. Servants greeted her politely as they passed, never treating her like an unwanted visitor. The kindness unsettled her more than hostility would have. She had spent the entire journey preparing herself to endure suspicion, yet no one seemed interested in humiliating her. Eleanor eventually stopped before a pair of carved wooden doors overlooking the royal gardens. She opened them slowly, revealing a spacious suite bathed in golden evening light. Fresh flowers rested beside tall windows facing the mountains. Neatly folded dresses hung inside a polished wardrobe, and shelves filled with beautifully bound books lined one wall beside a stone fireplace. A small tray holding warm tea and fresh bread waited upon the table. Claire remained standing in the doorway, unable to move. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. Eleanor smiled gently. "There is no mistake. These arrangements were requested personally by the Alpha King." Claire turned slowly toward the elderly woman. "Why?" Eleanor's expression softened. "I do not know, Miss Bennett. His Majesty rarely explains his decisions." As Claire quietly explored the unfamiliar room, another conversation unfolded several floors above within the western tower overlooking the valley. Adrian Blackwood stood inside the ancient observatory beside Lady Beatrice, the oldest royal historian and trusted advisor who had served 3 generations of rulers. Ancient star charts covered the circular walls, while shelves overflowing with weathered manuscripts surrounded them beneath a domed ceiling painted with constellations. Lady Beatrice studied Adrian's thoughtful expression before speaking. "You have been standing at that window since sunrise." Adrian smiled faintly. "Perhaps I have been waiting much longer than that." The elderly scholar folded her hands calmly. "The dreams again?" Adrian nodded. "Every full moon since I was 20 years old." His silver eyes drifted toward the distant palace courtyard where servants prepared lanterns for the evening. The same forest, the same moonlight, the same young woman whose face always disappeared before dawn. Lady Beatrice carefully removed an ancient leather-bound volume from a nearby shelf and opened it to a page worn by countless years of study. Delicate illustrations depicted two wolves standing beneath a brilliant moon separated by a flowing river. Beneath the painting, faded script carried a single prophecy. Some souls meet first within dreams because destiny prepares the heart before it reveals the path. Adrian quietly read the familiar words without speaking. He had memorized them years ago, yet they felt strangely different today. Before either could continue, a palace attendant entered with a respectful bow. "Your Majesty," he announced softly, "Miss Bennet has arrived safely." Adrian remained perfectly still. Something deep within him shifted with quiet certainty, as though a chapter he had been reading for years had finally reached the page he had unknowingly been waiting for. He closed the ancient book with gentle care before speaking only 6 calm words. "Tomorrow, I will welcome her personally." Far below, unaware that the most powerful man in Blackthorn had spent years searching for a face he had seen only in dreams, Claire stepped onto the balcony outside her room and looked across the moonlit valley, where countless lanterns flickered beneath the first stars of evening, feeling for the first time since leaving home that perhaps her future had not ended when the carriage left Silver Hollow, but had quietly begun instead. The following evening, the great hall of Blackthorn Palace glowed beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their warm golden light reflecting across polished marble floors and towering silver columns carved with the history of generations of Alpha Kings. Long tables were decorated with white lilies, evergreen branches, and handcrafted candles that filled the enormous chamber with quiet elegance rather than overwhelming luxury. Claire Bennet stood just beyond the entrance wearing the simple pale blue gown Eleanor had carefully prepared for her. Although the dress was more refined than anything she had ever owned, it remained modest, making her feel more like herself than someone pretending to belong among royalty. Her hands rested lightly together as she struggled to steady her breathing. She had never attended a royal gathering before, especially not inside the palace of the kingdom she had been taught to fear. Eleanor offered an encouraging smile. "There is nothing you must prove tonight," she whispered. "Simply be yourself." Claire nodded gratefully before following the attendants into the hall. Conversations softened almost immediately. Noble families, military commanders, scholars, and royal advisors quietly turned toward the unfamiliar Omega walking across the polished floor. Some looked surprised. Others looked curious. A few exchanged puzzled glances, wondering why the Alpha King had invited a young woman from Silver Hollow to a banquet usually reserved for honored guests and trusted allies. Claire lowered her eyes politely, refusing to let nervousness overcome her dignity. She reminded herself that fear did not have to decide every step she took. At the far end of the hall, musicians gently lowered their instruments as the royal herald struck the marble floor once with his ceremonial staff. His Majesty, Alpha King Adrian Blackwood. Every guest immediately rose. The massive oak doors behind the royal platform slowly opened, revealing Adrian as he entered with calm, measured confidence. He wore a formal black coat embroidered with intricate silver thread that shimmered beneath the candlelight, like moonlight resting upon fresh snow. His silver eyes remained thoughtful rather than proud, and although the room naturally followed his every movement, there was nothing arrogant about the way he carried himself. He acknowledged the gathering with a respectful nod before walking through the center aisle toward the royal table. Noble families bowed as he passed. Advisors greeted him quietly. Military officers placed one hand across their chest in formal respect. Adrian answered each greeting with composed courtesy, yet his attention seemed drawn towards something beyond the crowd. Then he saw her. Time appeared to slow until every sound inside the great hall faded into silence. Claire finally lifted her eyes, and for one endless heartbeat the distance between them disappeared. Adrian stopped walking. The young woman standing quietly beneath the chandelier was not merely similar to the face that had visited his dreams for nearly a decade. She was the very same woman. The gentle blue eyes, the soft light brown hair catching the warm candlelight, the quiet kindness reflected across her expression even while uncertainty lingered beneath it. Every impossible dream, every unanswered question, every moonlit vision suddenly became real. Claire felt something equally unexpected. She had imagined meeting a ruler whose presence would inspire fear alone, yet the man standing before her looked at her with unmistakable recognition rather than judgment. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction, no sense of ownership. Instead, she saw a quiet relief, almost as though someone he had feared losing forever had unexpectedly arrived safely at last. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence stretching between them carried more meaning than any formal greeting could have expressed. Lady Beatrice watched carefully from beside the royal advisors. She had witnessed Adrian face invading armies, impossible negotiations, and years of political uncertainty without revealing his emotions. Yet now, standing only a few yards from an ordinary Omega, the smallest change softened his normally guarded expression. It was enough to tell her everything she needed to know. Adrian finally resumed walking until he stood only a respectful distance from Claire. Instead of expecting her to bow first, he inclined his own head with quiet sincerity. A wave of astonishment passed through the assembled guests. Never before had their Alpha King offered such respect to someone who held no royal title. "Welcome to Blackthorn, Miss Bennet," he said gently. His voice was calm, warm, and remarkably familiar to Claire in a way she could not explain. She instinctively returned the respectful gesture. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The moment she spoke, Adrian recognized the same gentle voice that had echoed faintly through countless forgotten dreams beneath the full moon. Deep inside his heart, every lingering doubt disappeared. Destiny had not been an old legend after all. It had simply been patient. As the surrounding guests slowly resumed breathing and whispered quietly among themselves, neither Adrian nor Claire noticed the growing curiosity filling the hall, because both of them were silently wondering the very same impossible question. Why did meeting a complete stranger feel so much like finally coming home? The banquet continued beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. Yet for Adrian Blackwood, the voices surrounding him seemed to fade into distant echoes. Every time he glanced toward Claire Bennet, another forgotten fragment from years of impossible dreams quietly returned. He remembered moonlit forests stretching endlessly beneath silver skies, gentle laughter carried by the wind before dawn, and blue eyes that had always disappeared just as he believed he was close enough to speak. Now those same eyes looked back at him from across the royal table, no longer hidden by dreams, but alive within the woman quietly thanking every servant who placed another dish before her. She accepted each gesture with genuine gratitude, never behaving as though kindness were something she expected. That simple humility touched Adrian more deeply than any royal speech ever had. Throughout the meal, nobles carefully observed every movement between their Alpha King and the unexpected guest from Silver Hollow. They noticed how Adrian personally invited Claire to remain seated whenever formal customs required guests to stand. They noticed that he instructed the musicians to continue playing softer melodies after seeing the crowded hall made her uncomfortable. Most of all, they noticed that the king, who rarely smiled, now carried a quiet warmth upon his face whenever Claire happened to meet his gaze. Lady Beatrice watched everything without surprise. She had lived long enough to recognize moments that quietly changed history before anyone else understood their importance. After the final course had been served, Adrian rose from his chair and addressed the gathering with calm confidence. "Thank you all for joining us this evening. May the remainder of your night bring peace to your homes." As the guests respectfully departed, conversations immediately filled the corridors beyond the great hall. Every noble family discussed the mysterious Omega who had somehow earned the king's extraordinary respect. Claire remained standing beside the royal table, uncertain whether she should leave or wait for further instructions. Adrian approached with measured steps, stopping at a comfortable distance so she would never feel pressured. "I hope this evening was not overwhelming," he said gently. Claire smiled with quiet honesty. "It was very different from what I expected." Adrian's silver eyes reflected genuine curiosity. "Different in what way?" Claire hesitated before answering. "I was taught that Blackthorn hated my pack. I believed I would be treated as an enemy." Adrian looked toward the towering windows where moonlight now rested upon the palace gardens. Sometimes people inherit stories they never stop questioning. Claire considered those words carefully. and sometimes they inherit stories they never question at all. For a brief moment, silence settled comfortably between them. Neither felt the need to fill it with unnecessary conversation. Adrian eventually spoke again. Would you like to see the gardens? They are especially beautiful beneath the full moon. Claire nodded softly. Together they stepped through tall glass doors leading into the royal gardens where cool evening air carried the fragrance of white roses, cedar trees, and fresh rain lingering from the previous afternoon. Stone pathways wound through peaceful flower beds illuminated by elegant lanterns while a quiet fountain reflected the moon like polished silver. They walked side by side without rushing, listening to the gentle sound of flowing water and distant night birds calling through the trees. Claire suddenly stopped beside the fountain, staring thoughtfully at the moon reflected across its calm surface. May I ask you something? Adrian answered immediately. You may ask me anything. She turned toward him with sincere curiosity. Why have you treated me with such kindness since the moment I arrived? Adrian remained silent for several heartbeats. The truthful answer sounded impossible even inside his own thoughts. Finally, he spoke carefully. Because no one deserves to lose their dignity simply because life has become difficult. Claire lowered her eyes, deeply moved by words she had rarely heard before. Thank you, she whispered. Most people only saw that I was an Omega. Adrian answered quietly. I only see Claire Bennett. Those 4 words lingered in the peaceful night long after they were spoken. At that same moment, deep inside the palace archives, Captain Marcus and several royal investigators continued examining the documents that had accompanied Claire's transfer. One faded ledger immediately caught the captain's attention. This signature does not belong to any official merchant guild, he murmured. Another investigator unfolded a second parchment hidden beneath the first. Neither does this seal. Captain Marcus carefully compared both documents before looking toward the palace tower, where the king still walked peacefully beneath the moon. Someone wanted this agreement to remain hidden. Without delay, he gathered every suspicious record and made his way toward Adrian's private study. While Claire admired the quiet beauty of the royal gardens, completely unaware of the growing investigation, the first hidden pieces of a much larger deception had already begun revealing themselves. And before another sunrise arrived, Adrian would discover that Claire had never been sent to Blackthorn because his kingdom requested her, but because someone else had been carefully planning to turn 2 neighboring packs into enemies once again. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed in pale gold as sunlight poured through the towering windows of Blackthorn Palace. Claire Bennett woke to the gentle sound of birds singing beyond her balcony, and, for the first time since leaving Silver Hollow, realized she had slept peacefully through the entire night. The fear that had accompanied every mile of her journey had not disappeared completely, but it no longer controlled every thought. After a quiet breakfast prepared by the palace staff, Eleanor invited her to walk through the royal gardens while the morning remained cool. Claire gladly accepted. Dew still rested upon white roses and lavender bushes as she wandered along winding stone paths bordered by ancient oak trees whose autumn leaves shimmered in shades of amber and crimson. Palace gardeners greeted her with warm smiles instead of suspicious glances, and several young apprentices paused to thank her after she offered simple advice about caring for delicate herbs growing beneath the shade of the trees. None of them cared that she had come from another pack. They simply saw someone willing to help. High above the gardens, however, a far different conversation unfolded inside Adrian Blackwood's private council chamber. Captain Marcus carefully placed several recovered ledgers, trade permits, and sealed agreements across the polished oak table. Adrian studied each document without speaking while Lady Beatrice quietly observed beside the fireplace. After several minutes, Marcus finally broke the silence. Your Majesty, we have confirmed that Blackthorn never requested an Omega from Silver Hollow. Adrian slowly lifted his eyes. Explain. Marcus unfolded the transfer agreement Claire's brother had signed. The contract was delivered through an independent broker claiming to represent both packs. At first glance, everything appeared legitimate. However, none of the authorization seals belonged to Blackthorn. Lady Beatrice leaned closer, examining the faded wax imprint pressed into the parchment. This symbol does not belong to any recognized royal office, she murmured. Marcus nodded. Our investigators traced it to a secret network operating between several kingdoms. They call themselves the Ash Circle. Adrian remained perfectly still. The name was unfamiliar, yet the pattern immediately troubled him. Marcus continued. The organization specializes in manipulating political disputes. They profit whenever neighboring territories distrust one another. They create misunderstandings, conceal their involvement, and disappear before anyone discovers the truth. Adrian quietly closed the ledger. Then Claire was never their objective. Marcus answered immediately. No, Your Majesty. She was only the reason they believed conflict would begin. Lady Beatrice rested one hand upon the ancient prophecy book lying beside her. Someone expected Blackthorn to mistreat an innocent Omega. Silver Hollow would respond with outrage, and another generation of hatred would follow. Adrian looked toward the bright gardens outside the window where Claire could be seen helping an elderly gardener lift a basket filled with fresh flowers. She laughed softly as colorful leaves drifted through the morning breeze, completely unaware that her life had nearly become the spark for another war. That will not happen, Adrian said calmly. Not while I have any voice in this matter. Marcus placed one final document upon the table. It contained a record of every payment connected to the agreement. Near the bottom appeared a familiar name, Ethan Bennett. Additional compensation authorized following successful border transfer. Adrian studied the line carefully. Did Claire's brother know the true purpose? Marcus shook his head. We cannot say with certainty. The records only confirm that he accepted payment from an intermediary representing the Ash Circle. Adrian remained thoughtful for several moments before giving his next command. Arrange a formal gathering with Silver Hollow. I want every elder from both packs present. The truth will be shared openly before rumors decide it for us. Marcus bowed immediately. It will be done. Outside, Claire paused beside a small pond after noticing a frightened white swan trapped between tangled reeds near the shoreline. She knelt carefully, speaking in a calm voice while gently freeing the bird without causing it distress. Once released, the swan glided gracefully across the clear water before circling back toward her as though offering silent gratitude. Eleanor smiled warmly from nearby. Animals trust people whose hearts remain gentle. Claire looked down modestly. Perhaps they simply know when someone understands fear. Unseen from the balcony above, Adrian had witnessed the entire moment. Watching Claire comfort even the smallest frightened creature confirmed something his dreams alone never could. The woman before him possessed the same quiet strength that had drawn him across years of unanswered questions. She did not seek recognition. Kindness simply came as naturally to her as breathing. Yet beyond the peaceful walls of Blackthorn, another chapter had already begun. Deep inside a secluded hunting lodge hidden within the forests bordering Silver Hollow, Ethan Bennett accepted a second leather pouch filled with silver coins from a well-dressed stranger whose face remained hidden beneath a dark hood. The man smiled faintly before saying, "Everything is unfolding exactly as planned. Soon both packs will blame one another, and no one will ever suspect who truly started the fire." Ethan stared silently at the growing pile of silver, unaware that the truth he believed buried forever was already making its way toward him, carried not by vengeance, but by a king determined to replace deception with justice before another innocent life could be sacrificed to someone else's ambition. 3 mornings later, the mountain pass leading to Moonstone Summit shimmered beneath a brilliant autumn sky as delegations from Blackthorn and Silver Hollow slowly approached the ancient stone circle that had served as neutral ground for generations. The towering pines surrounding the summit stood perfectly still, their golden leaves drifting gently across weathered stone, as though even the forest understood that the decisions made there would shape the future of both kingdoms. Claire Bennett rode beside Eleanor in one of the royal carriages, her heart filled with quiet uncertainty. Adrian had explained only that both packs would gather to discuss the truth surrounding her arrival. He had not hidden anything from her, nor had he pressured her to attend. Instead, he had simply asked whether she wished to witness everything for herself. She had answered yes without hesitation because too much of her life had already been decided without her voice. As the carriage reached the summit, Claire stepped onto the ancient stones and immediately recognized familiar faces from Silver Hollow. Some villagers stared at her with disbelief after seeing her healthy, well-dressed, and completely unharmed. Others lowered their eyes in visible confusion because the terrible stories they had imagined clearly did not match the woman now standing before them. Near the center of the gathering stood Ethan Bennett. The moment he saw his sister, relief briefly crossed his face before quickly giving way to guilt so heavy that he could barely hold her gaze. Claire looked at him quietly, searching for the brother who had once carried her across frozen streams when she was too young to walk through the snow. She found traces of him beneath the burden he now carried, but she also saw a man who had made a choice that neither apology nor regret could erase overnight. Before either sibling could speak, the elders from both packs took their places around the stone circle. Adrian Blackwood walked calmly toward the center, dressed in formal black and silver royal attire that reflected the bright morning sunlight without appearing extravagant. His expression remained composed, his posture confident yet respectful toward everyone present. Once silence settled across the summit, he addressed both kingdoms in the same steady voice Claire had come to recognize as calm rather than commanding. We stand here today because lies were designed to become louder than truth. That ends now. Captain Marcus stepped forward carrying the recovered ledgers, trade agreements, and merchant records discovered inside the abandoned broker's office. One by one he presented every document to the elders of both packs, allowing each seal, signature, and payment record to be examined openly. Murmurs spread through the crowd as the evidence revealed that Blackthorn had never requested an Omega from Silver Hollow. Instead, an unknown organization had forged official authority, concealed its identity behind false agreements, and secretly rewarded those willing to cooperate. Elder Nathaniel of Silver Hollow slowly lifted one faded ledger after comparing its entries with the transfer agreement Ethan had signed. His face grew solemn. "These payments were never authorized by our council," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Nor by ours." Adrian allowed several moments of silence before speaking again. Someone believed fear would accomplish what honesty never could. They expected Blackthorn to treat Claire as property. They expected Silver Hollow to respond with anger. They expected another generation to inherit hatred instead of peace. Every eye gradually turned toward Ethan. He remained motionless for several long heartbeats before finally stepping into the center of the circle. His voice trembled as he faced both councils. "Everything they promised me sounded reasonable." He looked toward Claire with tears quietly gathering in his eyes. "They said my sister would live safely inside a wealthy kingdom. They said both packs would eventually negotiate. They told me the silver would save our home." He lowered his head. "I believed them because I wanted to believe there was a simple answer to years of hardship." Elder Nathaniel sighed deeply. "Desperation does not erase responsibility, Ethan, but it explains why deception found an open door." Claire listened without interrupting. Her heart still carried the pain of betrayal, yet hearing the truth lifted away the endless questions that had haunted every sleepless night since leaving home. Adrian then turned toward the assembled elders. "No kingdom grows stronger by humiliating the innocent. Blackthorn rejects every claim that any person may be bought, traded, or owned. Claire Bennett entered our territory under false circumstances, but from this day forward she will be treated only with the dignity every person deserves." A quiet stillness spread across Moonstone Summit unlike anything either pack had experienced in generations. Suspicion slowly gave way to reflection as the weight of the evidence settled upon everyone present. Claire glanced toward Adrian, realizing once again that the man standing before both kingdoms never sought victory over another pack. He sought only the truth. And as warm autumn sunlight illuminated the ancient stones beneath their feet, both kingdoms understood that the greatest battle had never been between neighboring packs at all, but between fear and the courage to choose something better. Silence lingered across Moonstone's summit long after Adrian Blackwood's final words faded into the cool autumn air. No one rushed to speak because every elder, every soldier, and every villager understood they had just witnessed years of misunderstanding begin to unravel before their eyes. The gentle wind carried golden leaves across the ancient stone circle, while sunlight streamed through the towering pine trees surrounding the sacred gathering place. Claire Bennett remained where she stood, her heart still heavy from everything she had learned, yet strangely lighter than it had been since the morning she left Silver Hollow. At last the endless questions had answers. The betrayal had been real, but it had also been manipulated by people who had never cared about her life at all. Elder Nathaniel slowly stepped toward the center of the gathering and addressed both packs with quiet dignity. The evidence presented here leaves little room for doubt. Our kingdoms were deceived by those who profit from fear instead of truth. Several elders from Blackthorn nodded in agreement. Lady Beatrice gently closed the recovered ledger and placed it upon the ceremonial table. Then let this summit be remembered not as the day enemies argued, but as the day neighbors finally listened. Her words settled peacefully over the assembly. Adrian then turned toward Claire. Every eye followed him, yet his expression remained as calm as it had been since the moment they first met. He walked only a few steps before stopping at a respectful distance, making certain that every person gathered could clearly see there was neither command nor expectation in his posture. Claire Bennett, he said gently, before these witnesses from both kingdoms, I wish to correct the greatest injustice committed against you. She met his silver eyes without speaking. Adrian continued in the same steady voice. No agreement signed by another person has the power to decide your future. No payment can determine your worth. No kingdom may claim ownership over your life. From this moment forward, every choice belongs entirely to you. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. Such words had never before been spoken publicly at a gathering between rival packs. Adrian looked toward the elders before returning his attention to Claire. If you wish to return to Silver Hollow today, Blackthorn will personally ensure your safe journey home. If you wish to remain within our kingdom, you will stay only because you choose to do so. If you decide your future lies somewhere neither kingdom has imagined, that choice will also be respected. Claire felt tears quietly gathering despite every attempt to remain composed. Throughout her life, others had spoken about her future as though her own voice mattered least. Decisions had always been made around her rather than with her. Yet now, standing before two entire kingdoms, the most powerful man she had ever known was placing her future entirely into her own hands. She lowered her eyes briefly, allowing herself one slow breath before lifting her head once more. For the first time, she said softly, someone has asked what I want. Adrian smiled gently. Because your answer is the only one that matters. Across the stone circle, Ethan slowly stepped forward. His face carried none of the confidence he had once hidden behind reassuring words. He stopped several feet away from Claire, careful not to invade the space she now deserved to control herself. Claire, he whispered, I do not expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to know that I would give back every coin if it meant undoing what I have done. Claire looked at her brother for a long moment. Pain remained inside her heart, but anger no longer stood alone beside it. She remembered the young man who had once carried firewood through snowstorms so she would stay warm, who had taught her how to identify healing herbs beside the creek, and who had lost his way while desperately trying to protect the only family he had left. Trust cannot return in a single day, she answered honestly. But truth gives it a place to begin. Ethan quietly nodded, accepting that her words were more generous than he deserved. Around them, the elders from both packs began discussing a new agreement that would reopen peaceful communication between their territories and investigate every remaining trace of the Ash Circle's influence. The organization that had hidden behind lies would no longer find easy shelter where honesty had finally taken root. As the gathering slowly came to an end, Claire walked toward the edge of Moonstone Summit where endless mountains stretched beneath the brilliant afternoon sky. Adrian joined her without speaking. Together, they watched sunlight spill across valleys that no longer seemed divided by invisible borders. Claire smiled quietly as the cool breeze brushed through her hair. For the first time since leaving home, she realized she was no longer afraid of tomorrow, because whatever path she chose next would finally belong to her alone. Several weeks passed, and autumn slowly gave way to the first gentle signs of winter across the valleys separating Blackthorn and Silver Hollow. What had once been a quiet border watched by suspicious guards gradually transformed into a welcoming road traveled by merchants, healers, craftsmen, and families from both packs. Markets filled once again with laughter instead of rumors, while wagons carrying grain, herbs, and handmade goods crossed the mountains beneath peaceful skies. The agreement signed at Moonstone Summit had become more than a treaty. It had become a promise that fear would no longer decide the future of two kingdoms willing to learn from the past. Claire Bennett remained at Blackthorn, not because anyone asked her to stay, but because she had finally discovered a place where every decision belonged to her alone. She spent her mornings helping the royal healers prepare medicines for nearby villages, her afternoons tending the palace gardens beside Eleanor, and many evenings reading ancient books with Lady Beatrice inside the quiet royal library. Day by day, she realized that belonging had never come from titles or bloodlines. It came from being respected exactly as she was. Adrian Blackwood never hurried her heart, never reminded her of old prophecies, and never expected gratitude for the kindness he freely offered. Instead, he simply walked beside her whenever their paths crossed, sharing peaceful conversations beneath ancient oak trees, discussing books inside the palace library, or watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson from the western balcony. Their friendship grew naturally through patience, honesty, and quiet understanding, becoming stronger with every ordinary moment they shared together. One crisp evening beneath the brightest full moon of the season, Adrian invited Claire to the highest balcony overlooking the valley where thousands of lanterns now illuminated villages from both kingdoms. Their warm light stretched across the landscape like stars resting upon the earth itself. Claire stood silently beside the stone railing, the cool breeze gently lifting her light brown hair while she admired the peaceful view before her. Adrian reached into his coat and carefully placed a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon into her hand. "This belonged to my mother," he said softly. "She believed every person deserved one place in the world where they would always be welcomed without conditions. Whether your journey keeps you here or someday leads elsewhere, I hope this reminds you that Blackthorn will always be such a place for you." Claire looked down at the delicate pendant before smiling with quiet gratitude. "For a long time, I believed my future had been decided by someone else's signature," she whispered. "Now I understand that my future begins with my own choices." Adrian smiled gently. "That is exactly as it should be." She looked toward the endless mountains stretching beneath the moonlight before speaking the words her heart had already chosen. "Then my choice is to stay." There was no celebration, no dramatic proclamation, and no prophecy demanding an answer. Only two people standing beneath the same moon that had quietly connected their dreams long before they ever met, now choosing one another through freedom rather than destiny alone. Across the valley, Ethan Bennett remained in Silver Hollow, working each day beside his neighbors to rebuild both the village and the trust he had broken. He no longer searched for quick solutions or easy promises. Instead, he learned that true redemption was earned one honest decision at a time. The hidden network known as the Ash Circle slowly disappeared as neighboring kingdoms shared information uncovered during the investigation, leaving fewer places for deception to hide behind fear. Seasons continued changing, but the lessons born from that extraordinary journey remained. No person should ever be treated as something that can be bought or traded. True strength protects instead of controlling. Genuine love never begins with ownership, but with respect. And sometimes the greatest destiny is not discovering who has been searching for you all along, but finding the courage to choose your own path when someone finally gives you the freedom to do so. Under the silver light of the full moon, two kingdoms looked toward the future with hope instead of suspicion, and two hearts found peace not because fate demanded it, but because kindness had quietly become stronger than fear. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like. Share it with friends and family who enjoy heartfelt fantasy stories, and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and what lesson inspired you the most from Claire and Adrian's unforgettable journey.